Mary Pipino, and welcome to Fit for You, the show that teaches you how to live a healthier and more fit lifestyle. I'm wearing my version of red today because February is Heart Health Month, and today we're going to talk about heart health. We're going to be joined by Dr. Mike Lileas for the medical perspective and Val Diorio about some of the better food choices to make. I hope you enjoy the show. If we're going to talk about heart disease, we definitely want to start with the medical perspective, and who better than one of our favorite Fit for You physicians, Dr. Michael Lileas. And again, I love this because I have to read, even though I know you so well, you're on frequently, but I have to read. The credentials keep getting bigger every time you come on.
I forget myself.
I love it. It's awesome. We're going to need to set aside so many minutes for credentials pretty soon. So board certified doctor of internal medicine and now board certified in sleep.
Yes.
Founding partner of Salem Internal Medicine, associate professor of internal medicine at Neo-UCOM, and hospitalist at the Surgery Center at Southwoods. Thank you, thank you.
You got it all.
I know. And you know, it really is. You're such a great asset to the show because you can speak so intelligently about so many aspects of health. So I thank you. And I love the red, so appropriately dressed. Yes, February's Heart Month.
There we go.
So let's talk about this thing called heart disease. What is heart disease?
Well, I guess when you're talking about heart disease, you want to define, there's so many different aspects of heart disease. There's valvular heart disease, there's heart failure, there's different types of infectious heart disease. But when we talk about heart disease, we're really speaking of coronary heart disease, meaning a disease of the vessels. So the arteries and the veins, we're talking about arteriosclerosis, atherosclerosis, or what we used to call hardening of the arteries. Where the arteries, which are really kind of mushy.
Is this my little diagram
There
here?
you go.
Okay.
And you see how the arteries, they're a little bit mushy. But as they get affected with the cholesterol and the atherosclerosis process, they become stiff.
As they start to build up this not so good stuff.
Yeah, that's the bad stuff that gets built up in there.
So we
And
start
that's
out
what we're
here
gonna
nice
try
and open, right?
Talk about why we get from here to here.
Okay.
And figure out, are there steps we can do to intervene and not end up here?
So let's talk about it. So what are the risk factors? What are these risk factors we hear about?
Okay, well, when you go back years ago into what was called the Framingham study, big study in Massachusetts, where they studied all these different, mostly at that time they were studied men from the ages of like 40 to 70. And they said, okay, well, let's look at groups of men that smoke, groups of men that have high blood pressure, groups of men that have diabetes, that drink a lot, that don't exercise. And then they categorized them and they said, well, okay, if you have this many risk factors, then this is your risk of dying in 10 years with heart disease. The problem is we've been using that model for so many years now. Years. I just read an article just this morning that they talked about the risk factor analysis and using those models and how they've been actually found to be off by 35 to 75%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's going to make a big impact, I think, on a lot of primary care physicians. People are going to want to know, do I do a Framingham risk or not? And I think the answer is yes, but you got to use it with a grain of salt. So when you're looking at risk factors, we're looking at blood pressure. What is your blood pressure resting? Does everybody have spikes in their blood pressure? Yes, absolutely. If you're in pain, your blood pressure spikes. If you're excited or nervous, it goes up. If you're sleeping, it goes down. So all these different things, you have to know what is your blood pressure running. And our magic number that we always used to use in the office was 140 over 90. Anything 140 over 90 or more is considered hypertensive. That's a risk for heart disease, for development of that plaque. Diabetes.
Now, you may have the genetic propensity to have high blood pressure because of your family history, correct?
Absolutely.
And you can control that with lifestyle a little bit and a little medicine.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And here's the thing about the family history. As they always say, you can't change your genes. You can change your denims, but you can't change your genes. So, if you have a family history of blood pressure, if you have a family history of heart disease, and by a family history of heart disease, normally what we mean is you have someone in your family that developed heart disease, whether it was a heart attack, angina, bypass, they got a stent, and it happened usually before the age of 60. Anytime it happens, like if you have, okay, my father had a heart attack at 75, does that really count genetically? Nobody knows that answer. People are going to tell you they know that answer, but I don't think anybody really knows that answer. If they did, they'd come out with a paper and say, we've proved it, but they don't, and I don't think they will.
Don't you think, too, lifestyle is having such a major impact? Because think about how many less people smoke today than they did
no question.
30, 40 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that is the price, the taxes that they've, added to cigarettes. If you buy cigarettes, I think here in the Youngstown area, I think it's like $6 or something for a pack of cigarettes. Yet you go to New York or Chicago, you're paying $12 to $14 for a pack of cigarettes.
That blows my mind.
That?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you're a 2-pack-a-day smoker, you're paying almost $30 a day to smoke cigarettes.
Besides smoking, fast food. When fast food came into fashion back in the 60s and 70s, no one realized how bad it was for you. Now we're realizing, maybe we better making some better food choices than, just eating so much fried and so much, saturated, high fat, burgers and hot dogs and things like that.
Well, and I think that too, as we've looked at that and over the years we've seen that, these high fat foods and these high fat burgers and these fast foods and fried foods, they have so much cholesterol in them. And then we have to account for that in our body when we take it into our body. What's it doing to us? And I don't think we knew back then how bad it was for us.
Todd, let's talk about cholesterol because we hear a lot about it. I don't think, a lot of our viewers, I bet, don't even know our body makes it. But cholesterol is, define cholesterol.
Okay, well, cholesterol is an organic molecule, and meaning it's made in the body. It's made by animals make it, our liver makes it, and cholesterol is used in a number of things. For instance, cholesterol, the molecule itself, is used in cell membranes. So many, many, many different cells in our bodies are made up partly of cholesterol. And the reason why that is that cholesterol molecule on the cell membrane increases the way the cells are fluid, the way that they move. For instance, red blood cells. Red blood cells have, cholesterol molecule on them, and it helps them to get through the very small arterioles and capillaries. Think about it. A red blood cell may be a certain size. And then think about the capillary that's the size of a hair. Well, that red blood cell has to go through that capillary. And it does so by changing shape. And the reason it changes shape is partly because of the cholesterol. It's this lipid bilayer that helps the one-celled red blood cell to change its shape, go through the arteriole or the capillary, and then regain its shape when it's done.
So is it the good cholesterol, which is the HDL, that helps it to get through?
Well, it's not so much whether it's good cholesterol or bad cholesterol. It's just that that's the cholesterol molecule that is part of that lipid bilayer, that part of that cell membrane.
So what happens then when you get too much cholesterol?
Well, when you get too much cholesterol, your body, especially dietary, okay, let's go back to dietary. So we're talking about all the fats that we take in and the burgers and everything. What happens to all that? So it gets into your intestinal tract. And what happens is, it's picked up by these proteins. And there's 5 major proteins that pick up this cholesterol. The what's called the chylomicrons, which look kind of like big fat things like that, big fat globules.
Big
okay,
fat things like this.
that are in your picking
This
up
is
the
5
cholesterol.
pounds of fat, guys.
And it's just holding that cholesterol in there, wanting to know what the body wants it to do.
So let's talk about the HDL, LDL, you mentioned IDL. Explain to me what these are.
Okay, these are called lipoproteins.
Okay.
And these proteins carry the cholesterol.
Okay.
Okay, and they determine what's done with it. One of the bigger molecules that carries a lot of cholesterol, triglycerides, is called a chylomicron. When I think of a chylomicron, I think of this big fat globule that's sitting around in your body.
Like this hideous, this is
trying
5 pounds of fat.
Trying to figure out, and your body's trying to figure out, what do I do with this fat? What do I do with this cholesterol? And then you have the intermediate density lipoproteins. You have the low density, which is we know as our bad cholesterol.
LDL.
That's our LDL. You can think of it as lousy. Your lousy cholesterol.
I like that.
Okay?
That's great.
So LDL, lousy, bad cholesterol. Okay, what does that do? The bad cholesterol does this inside your arteries.
Oh.
It deposits itself inside the wall of your arteries.
So now.
Going back to this. So here's what happens over the years. This LDL gets inside the arterial wall and just starts getting it more and more narrow.
And when you get too narrow and then the blood can't get through, heart attack?
Absolutely.
Or stroke?
Or stroke,
Okay.
depending upon where the blood vessel is.
Okay.
Now, you have this other cholesterol, the HDL, the happy cholesterol.
I like that, the good
HDL,
one.
the good cholesterol.
Yeah.
What does that do? Well, what that does is that takes the LDL, grabs it, brings it to the liver, and uses that cholesterol molecule to make good molecules for you. Estrogen, testosterone, cortisol, okay, aldosterone. So that is used by that molecule that the HDL brought back to the liver. Now we can synthesize new molecules from it by taking that and breaking it down. Okay. It also breaks down the cholesterol in the plaque. So that's the good thing that this does for you. Now, the other thing we were talking about was the triglycerides. The triglycerides
What are they?
It's like an energy store. When you eat a lot of carbohydrates and it's absorbed in your GI tract and then it gets into your bloodstream, what happens is that these triglycerides, they're the result of all this carbohydrate that you took in. And what happens is it's like a store of energy. It's just waiting to do something, but we don't know what we're going to do with it. The problem is if you eat too much of it and you got all these triglycerides running around your blood, your risk of developing type 2 diabetes is high.
Why?
Because what happens is the triglycerides are part of the problem with diabetes. Most people with diabetes have elevated triglycerides. And then the elevated triglycerides causes the sugar to be elevated. So it's like a snowball effect. As this goes on, okay, the triglycerides are high, then the sugar's high. Sugar's high, triglycerides are high, and it just keeps going and going. And you got to break that cycle.
See, it's amazing that, and you don't think of the two diseases as being related, but they are.
Oh, absolutely.
And the thing that scares me about people not having better lifestyles today is because isn't so much of the diabetes we're seeing and the heart disease a result of poor lifestyle choices, not just
Absolutely.
genetics?
Right. I mean, genetics has so much of a role to play in it. But yeah, you're absolutely right with the lifestyle. I mean, someone who's sedentary has a higher incidence of having heart disease. Someone who's sedentary has a higher incidence of developing diabetes. All this because you're just not utilizing the energy you need to utilize on a regular basis.
The body was made to move.
Exactly.
When we were preparing for today, you talked about a study that you had just read about, and it was, I like the way you said, hey, I was thinking about when I'm doing my charts, I want to get up and walk around for a few minutes. Tell me about it.
So one of the recent studies that I read about was talking about, movement and just simple movements that people, think about this, secretaries, ward clerks, people that sit at a desk all day or they're on a computer all day. They're not moving. They're very sedentary all day long.
Business executives, office people.
And when do they get up? To go to lunch or to go to the bathroom. Well, what the new recommendations is, get up every half hour or hour or so, walk for 2 minutes. Walk around the office, walk around the hallways, just to get your muscles stimulated. And it reduces your risk of heart disease by 30%.
That's
just
amazing.
Doing that.
Yes, every so often getting up for a couple of minutes. And I don't think people recognize how important walking is. Like they think, oh, if I'm going to get into this exercise program, they make it like this, heroic effort. It doesn't have to be.
Right.
Move, walk.
Right. I mean, if you look at some of the recommendations over the years, they talked about, what should you do aerobically, to reduce your risk of heart disease, 40 minutes of cardiovascular work, 3 days a week. But now they're saying just move, just walk. That's all we're asking people to do is move and walk. And that's going to reduce your risk dramatically.
Let's talk about stress. This thing, stress, is such a horrible thing when it comes to health, because I think it affects everything. What happens with the heart?
Well, I think basically what happens with stress is that it stimulates your autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system is what controls your heart rate, your blood pressure. So if you stimulate your autonomic nervous system, what's going to happen is your blood pressure is going to go up, your heart rate's going to go up, your counter-regulatory hormones like cortisol are going to go up, and you're going to feel like you're on the edge all the time. And all that's doing is overstimulating your heart when it's supposed to be relaxing. That's the problem. It's one thing to have that fight or flight, when you need it, but to have it just because you're under stress is a bad part.
And it does weigh on the cells of the heart, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Again, it's like causing a little bit of extra wear and tear you don't need.
Well, when you were talking about, when you get that blockage in the artery and you're getting down to a few millimeters. Well, does it get completely covered with cholesterol plaque before it blocks off? Usually the answer is no. What happens is there's a stress on the artery. That stress affects this plaque. So whether the stress is from mental stress, whether the stress is from smoking cigarettes, whether the stress is from doing exercise that you aren't supposed to do because you shouldn't have done that much in that short of a time. You got to make sure
like
that your body's
snow when
like
it's
shoveling
extremely
snow
cold,
when it's really cold outside,
and you're not in the best of shape,
and you don't know if you really have heart disease or not. What could happen is this plaque could rupture. When the plaque ruptures, blood cells come into play. They come to try to fix think about it as like there's a nick in the artery. So these blood cells are going to come and try to patch it up like a Band-Aid. But the problem is when they come there and this thing's already blocked 90%, well, all those blood cells that come there are just going to block the rest of the way. So now you have a blood clot that's blocking the rest of this artery. That's the heart attack. That's the stroke.
Wow. And there's so many ways to avoid it or to treat it.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about sleep, because sleep is such a big factor in this, good sleep, quality sleep.
Absolutely. A lot of changes occur when you go to sleep. When you go to sleep, your sympathetic nervous system doesn't shut down, but it cuts down by about 20% or so. And what that does is reduces your heart rate, it reduces your blood pressure. And most of that occurs during the non-REM sleep, the regular
Real
sleep.
quick, REM, non-REM.
REM and non-REM sleep. I always think of this as the REM sleep is your dream state, your dreaming sleep. Your really good deep sleep is your REM sleep. And what happens is through the night, you have different stages of sleep. You have stage 1, 2, and 3, and then you go through it, and then you hit REM, then you go 1, 2, and 3. And it happens over and over again through the night. But what happens is, during your non-REM sleep, you're rested, and your sympathetic nervous system kind of deactivates by 20 to 30%, slowing your heart rate, slowing your blood, or lowering your blood pressure, and what happens, you're relaxed. Well, when you have something like sleep apnea, well, what happens is, number one, it gets worse during REM sleep. It also occurs during non-REM sleep. And what this does is it deactivates that sympathetic nervous system. So now your heart rate goes up, or it could overstimulate the parasympathetic and your heart rate could go too low. And so all these different types of arrhythmias can happen during sleep when you have sleep apnea. The other thing that can happen is arrhythmias. Your heart could start going too fast, you overshoot the sympathetic, or go too slow, you overshoot the parasympathetic. So the other thing is stroke and heart attacks themselves are higher incidence when you have sleep apnea.
And you have a higher rate of stroke and heart attack, especially heart attack, at night, right? Is
Right.
that why they tell you
Right.
if you take a baby aspirin, take it in the
at
evening
night.
before you go
Right.
to sleep?
Absolutely.
Now, if you have the signs, and I want to talk quickly too, let's talk a little bit about the signs. Signs of a heart attack that we need to be aware of: chest pain or discomfort, upper body pain or discomfort in the arms, back, neck, jaw, upper stomach. I mean, how do you know whether I'm having like a
Heart attack or an
People-
anxiety
yeah,
attack.
exactly.
Or gallbladder.
okay?
And that's the problem. You don't. You don't know that. Here's the one thing that I could tell you about angina pains, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about heart pain, also called angina, because it's intermittent. It comes and goes. It depends on what you do. There are certain things that bring it on. Maybe shoveling snow brings it on. Okay, if you're shoveling snow and you start getting chest pain, you need to go sit down and see if that goes away. Because if it doesn't go away, you could be having a heart attack.
And like, how long do you wait for it to go away? Not like 12 hours.
2 minutes.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Big difference.
Goes away in 2 minutes, you're okay. Doesn't go away in 2 minutes, you got to start thinking about going to the emergency room to get checked.
Okay.
Okay. Especially if it's associated with dizziness, you're clammy, sweaty, dizzy, nausea. All these things associated with it can all be predictors of heart attacks. Now, you were asking, how do you know which it is? And unfortunately, there's just no way sometimes to know. Heart pain, angina pain, usually comes with exertion. Goes away with rest. That's the usual
In a
scenario.
short period of time.
In a short period of time. But those pains can be anywhere. It could be here, crushing chest pain. Could be between your shoulder blades. Could be in your arm, your shoulder. Could be in your jaw. Maybe it's, I got a toothache. But how come it only comes on when I'm shoveling snow? And then I go back in the house and it stops. Because that was angina.
So activity is definitely, if you're having pain
Associated
during
with heart.
activity,
Absolutely.
yeah.
That is something you absolutely need to look into. Any kind of strange discomfort that you're not sure, that could be construed as heart disease, and you have it with exertion, you need to look into that.
People that should be on some type of a cholesterol reduction, cholesterol control medication, they're like, I don't want to take it, it's going to make my muscles hurt, blah, blah, blah. Is the incident of heart attack and stroke much greater if you do not take it than maybe a few of the side effects you may experience?
Well, you're talking mostly about the statin drugs. and they work through the liver, which is, the liver makes 25% of our cholesterol. And the statins work with this enzyme called HMG-CoA reductase. And what they do is they decrease the low density, the bad, lousy cholesterol, and increase the happy HDL cholesterol. But who needs those medications? That's the question. And the problem is that the answer to that question has been changing over the years. But if you look at the latest stuff that came out in the past probably year, American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, what they're saying is people with known coronary disease need to be on a statin. People with known vascular disease in their legs, they've had an aneurysm, they've had blockage, blood clots, they need to be on a statin. Someone who's a diabetic, type 1 or type 2, between the ages of 40 and 75, need to be on a statin. And if you're 21 years old and your bad cholesterol is over 190, you need to be on a statin.
Now,
that's the new recommendation.
Okay, now, what about somebody like me who I'm around 100, I'm a little over 190, under 200, but my HDL...
On your bad or your good?
No, my total. My HDL is extremely high.
See,
my
I'm talking
LDL is
about
low.
Strictly based on the LDL cholesterol.
Okay.
Okay.
Because that's, I think, another thing.
That's our target. With statins, that's our target. To lower the LDL, raise the HDL. Mm-hmm. That's what we're trying to do.
So when you have a high HDL, like I do, you're not going to have an overall cholesterol of 150.
No, you're blessed.
I know. And it's crazy because, doesn't run in my family. Right. So I wonder if it's lifestyle, a little bit of lifestyle.
I'm sure
yeah.
I'm sure it's part lifestyle, part genetic.
Yeah.
If there's not a history of strokes, heart attacks, vascular disease in your family, people live into their 80s. It's a good chance that, they had good cholesterol too.
Now, my mom's side of the family was much better in that area than my dad's. My mom was a little bit more frequent, and her family was cancer, and my dad's definitely vascular and blood pressure and things like that. But it's funny. My point is, even when you have these, these genetics, so to speak,
right.
You can have some control. That's why it's important, I think, to look at your lifestyle.
And modify your risk factors.
Right.
If you're a smoker, stop.
Right.
If you drink too much alcohol, cut back. If you don't exercise, start.
I think movement is like the most important. Dr. Lileas, you're always such a wealth of information. I think if our viewers walk away with nothing else, walk, watch your high-fat foods, moderation, anything else that
and get your risk factors assessed. Go to your primary care doctor and have them evaluate you for your risk factors: the blood pressure, the smoking, the exercise, the cholesterol profile. And then you can modify the things that need to be modified.
And what about your blood sugar?
Blood sugar too. That's usually all part of the whole metabolic profile that they do on people when they evaluate them.
So when you go to your family physician, what do you want to ask for? Because I know blood work can be like 75 pages long. You want them to ask for
you want to ask for a lipid profile. Mm-hmm. You want to ask for a metabolic profile, which is going to check your kidney, liver function, your electrolytes, sodium, potassium, calcium, and you want to do a complete blood count. You want to do the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the platelets, and you want to have them do those things when they check your cholesterol.
Once a year, once every couple of years?
Well, initially, if you're 21 years old, you want to get it one time and see whether you need to do anything. Then maybe you need to get it every 3 to 5 years. If you're 40 or over, you probably need to get it every year.
And it's always good to at least get your baseline and
right.
So
you know where you're at.
Right.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. You're wonderful.
Thank you very much.
As I noted in my opening, lifestyle plays a really big part in heart health. So we're going to talk about the diet food aspect with our favorite dietitian, Val Diorio. Welcome, Val.
Thank you, Mary. Glad to be here.
Yes, and February is Heart Health Month.
Yes.
And some of our viewers may be watching this in February, carrying it into March. But I think the things we're going to talk about today are the way people should be eating all year round.
Exactly.
And we know that the food choices you make really make a difference. Let's start talking about why. What are the components of a diet? Let's talk about the major categories. So you have proteins, you have
carbohydrates, and you have fats.
And water.
And water.
Okay, so let's start with the most notable one that everyone seems to be frustrated with, the carbohydrates.
Correct. So carbohydrates should be, as again, part of our diet, a healthy carbohydrate choice. About 45 to 50% of our daily intake we want to consume from carbohydrates.
And I want to explain to the audience, and it may be repetitive for some, but carbohydrates are fruits, are vegetables. Don't confuse carbohydrates with starches, because talk about the starch component of the carbohydrates.
A starch is a carbohydrate, and it's a naturally occurring in the food. So starches would be breads, rice, pasta, cereals, crackers, grains. And then we have other carbohydrates such as fruit, and then we have yogurt and milk are also carbohydrates, part of that dairy group.
And milk and dairy are half protein, half carbohydrate?
They have both. They're a little bit of a combination, but yes.
Now, selecting the right carbohydrates are very important because of fiber.
Correct.
So tell me a little bit about fiber and what we're finding out about fiber today.
So fiber is beneficial for a multitude of reasons. Number one, it helps, well, we don't digest it. It's an indigestible carbohydrate. So we eat it and then it travels through the body and then is passed or removed from the body. So when we eat it, number one, it's beneficial in weight loss because it gives us that full feeling, that satiety feeling, because we can't break it down. Number two, it's also beneficial in helping as it's traveling through the bloodstream, that it removes excess cholesterol along the artery there, as well as excess blood sugar for somebody who is diabetic. So it's beneficial for weight loss, for people with diabetes, and people with high cholesterol. And it's also helpful to help lower your risk for heart disease by eating a high fiber diet. But when we find fiber in foods, it's going to be found in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Because
now we get to the critical part of selecting the highest quality foods with the highest density of nutrients. Right. So which carbohydrates you select are critical, because if you pick the bad ones, they're going to really make the problem horrific. Correct. And if you pick the good ones, they're going to be extremely beneficial.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about, and we have a little example here that I think is really interesting. When we talk about fiber and we talk about juicing versus eating a whole fruit, I'm going to show my little graphic here. And in my right hand, there are a few little nuggets in this test tube, if you can see, and that's the fiber in a glass of orange juice.
6 ounce glass, correct.
In this lovely little test tube, I've got almost, let's say a third of this test tube full of fiber, and that's just eating the whole orange.
Right, a medium orange, about the size of a tennis ball, a little larger.
So you don't think about it, but even though orange juice isn't a bad food, you're getting a lot more concentrated sugar. Pick the whole fruit.
Right, and your body processes the whole fruit and utilizes that so much better than versus drinking the juice. Correct.
And when you eat the whole fruit, and vegetables would be,
Along
very
the same
similar,
lines.
You get also some water. So that's really important.
That's beneficial too, absolutely. And when you're looking, if you were looking on the food label for fiber, and you look down under fiber, anywhere from about 5 grams or higher is going to be considered a high source of fiber in that food. 3 or less is going to be low. And when you're selecting foods in terms of grains, just because it's brown doesn't mean, oh, it's great in fiber, it's great whole wheat, because it can have molasses added to it or another ingredient. So when you read food labels, you want to make sure whatever grain it is that it says whole in front of that grain and not enriched.
Let's talk about bread, because that's one that's very confusing, because you go to the grocery store today, shelf full of whole wheat bread. And when you look at the fiber,
Right.
it is amazing to me that sometimes the fiber in a slice of a whole wheat bread is the exact same. It's less than 1 gram than it is in white bread.
Right.
Why?
Well, then because it's not actually a true whole wheat bread. It's
Yes.
been, it's been processed and it's been milled out and it's been removed. And then again, that molasses is added back in. So don't just look for brown or color as a rule for fiber. You need to read that label.
Would you say a good rule of thumb when you're making a selection and you're looking at a grain, look for whole grain?
Whole
and
grain.
Is always better than wheat.
Right, so whole in front of that grain, whatever it is. If you see enriched as the first ingredient, then just pass that product by. And again, you can also, it looks like a postage stamp that says 100% whole grain. That would be found somewhere on the label.
And the thing that I have a little test too, that when you always wonder how much grain is in something, if you take some of it and ball it up in your hand, if there's grain in it,
Yes.
you're going to feel like the
feel
little
it.
tiny pearls that I call them, or the
Yes,
grain in your. If it just like lumps all
Disintegrates,
together like a
yes.
glob of dough,
It's nothing.
right?
Yeah.
They've processed that one beyond,
Yes.
beyond the grain.
Absolutely, so.
And let's talk about rice, because rice is a really wonderful thing. I'm sometimes too, if I can't necessarily get brown, I will choose a whole grain, but I'm always particular about making sure it's a whole grain. Talk a little bit about instant, and this is true about oatmeal, this is true about a potato,
Right.
anything when you think of instant versus.
Right, so the instant and that process of preparing it, it is removing those outer layers of the bran or the germ or that grain. So you're losing that fiber. And when we enrich it, we add B vitamins back and we might add iron back, but you're not getting that fiber back. So therefore, you're losing the value there of why you think you are choosing it as a high fiber food. So it's very important that you are not, remove instant from your diet. You want to get away from instant, get 100% the whole cooked oatmeal or the brown rice, same with the potato.
And I've said it many times, I get the regular oatmeal, I stick it in the microwave with the water. It's cooked in 3 minutes, so it's not like it takes a day.
No. And then you can cook it ahead of time for a few days, make a large portion, and just, portion it out that morning and it's done.
Keep it
Same
in the
amount of
refrigerator.
time. Exactly.
I think that's another really great rule. When you're looking at your whole grain products, if something cooks really quickly or is quick cooking, that means they had to remove the most nutrient-dense portion, which is the outer layer and the bran portion with all the fiber.
Right.
So that's what's making it cook quickly, because
it's not there.
Right.
So that endosperm and that germ are gone.
Exactly. Okay, now we're going to jump to proteins. Let's
Okay,
talk about proteins.
So in protein, in terms of Heart Health Month, we want to choose lean proteins. And proteins, roughly 20-25% of your daily intake should come from protein. So in choosing proteins and keeping in mind heart health, you want to keep your choices to lowering your saturated fat. And saturated fat is mainly found in beef, pork, lamb.
Let's talk about saturated fat, because that's really important to heart health. Now the studies are finding even more so. And I guess we're going to jump into, we'll talk about fats now, because the two kind of cross over so closely. They go hand in hand. So talk to us about the research that they're finding about saturated fat.
So saturated fat they're finding now is really affecting blood lipid levels. So saturated fat and trans fat, both are raising those and increasing
Which means
your risk for
there's
heart
more
disease.
fat in your blood.
Right.
And that's what is going to clog the arteries,
Correct.
create heart disease,
Right.
lead to stroke, lead to heart attack.
Right. So when you're choosing protein, you want to look for proteins, again, when we say lean, that are also low in saturated fat. They've just actually lowered, American Heart Association, the guidelines. It used to be 10% of your calories are saturated fat. Then it was lowered to 7. Now they've just lowered it in the past year 5 to 6%. So if that was a 2,000 calorie diet and you were looking at grams of saturated fat on food labels, that's only 13 grams of saturated fat daily that we should be taking in.
And tell us, I know you have a little chart here. Let's talk about foods that are high and low in saturated fat. And there again, it's making the choice.
Correct. So if we look at the top here, the top right, we have hamburger meat. We have 80% lean and then versus 95% lean. And you can see 15 grams of fat here.
So the little yellow
is a teaspoon. Each little yellow section is 1 teaspoon.
Of saturated fat.
Right. So then you have versus 95% lean. And these are in 3-ounce cooked portions.
So that 95% lean is literally 1/3 of the bad fat.
Yes.
Okay.
If you look, for instance, in...
Let's go next. It's the beef hot dog.
Beef hot dog versus a light hot dog. Again, 13 grams, again, 3 teaspoons, versus a light hot dog, 2.5 grams.
That's less than half of it. That's about half a teaspoon. So that's less than 1/3. So that really does make a difference.
It makes a big difference. And people just, you just need to realize, and look at food labels too. And it depicts on the label saturated fat. So you can see it and you can find it and it's very easily visible.
Yes, because on the label, I just want people to know, you're going to see fat, total grams, then underneath it, you'll see saturated,
monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and trans if it would be there.
And trans we really want to stay away from too.
Yes.
Go ahead, milk.
And then we have milk, and you can see whole milk, 8 grams versus, and that's in 1 cup, versus fat-free, again, 1 cup, 0 grams. I mean...
And at the very least, if you can't go from whole to fat-free, start weaning yourself off. Go to 2.
And then even 1.
And if
one is fine too. And when people say, well, I need the calcium, there's actually more calcium in the lower fat than the whole.
Well, and and I'm an almond milk drinker. So the almond milks you're buying today, and usually if you're getting soy, whatever, there's calcium added into them as well.
Yeah.
So it's there.
Another one I wanted to look at too was chicken. The chicken nuggets. And this is 6 pieces. 20 grams or 4 teaspoons versus a grilled chicken breast, about 3 ounces, 6 grams.
That's amazing. So you were literally there getting 1/4. You skipped over your little boxes on the far left, and that's a great one.
The French fries and baked potato.
And people think in our American diet, right? The vegetable of the American diet. I think it's changing a bit, but it was the French fry.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you look here, these are a medium serving of fries, 25 grams or 5 teaspoons versus a baked potato. And this is 1 potato, about 3 ounces in the palm of your hand, 0.
And now if you put the slab of butter on it and you add the whole sour cream.
Right, then you're adding the saturated fat right back in.
Yes.
You're defeating the purpose.
Yes, so try to stick with salsa.
Yes.
I like a little sriracha or hot sauce.
Yeah, hot sauce is great too.
Hot sauce is like the little, it's like the kept secret, and seasonings for making what people think is bland,
spice it up.
Low-fat foods, blah.
Right.
Yeah, there's so many great things you can do.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about, then we come over to pizza.
And our pizza here. This is a deep dish, extra pepperoni, and this is 1 slice. 3.5 teaspoons or 17 grams of fat versus a thin crust, again, 1 medium slice, 8 grams. So you're getting 2 teaspoons of fat. But again, it's the obvious choice. And again, you're reducing that bad fat.
Exactly. And if you pick mozzarella cheese, for example, for your pizzas, it's part skim.
Right, so it's a little less, and you can see right under here, it's only about a teaspoon for a 1 ounce serving.
Yes.
Versus like something, a higher fat for cheddar.
That's a cheddar.
Right.
Well, it's literally half.
Right.
So I think when you're selecting your cheeses, farmer's cheese, there's a Lorraine Swiss.
Alpine lace.
Right.
Yes.
Look and see if it's low fat. Look and see if it is made with part skim. You know, learning to read labels doesn't have to be long and complicated.
No.
Just learn the few key important points.
Right. And when you look at the labels too, if you look at total fat, 3 grams of fat or less is going to indicate that it's a low fat cheese. So that's there as well.
That's what to watch for. Oh, now we're getting into my favorite food. My cheat day is my favorite, cake and ice cream.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that ice cream.
Our ice cream, again, half cup servings. Regular vanilla versus a non-fat frozen yogurt. 0 grams in your non-fat frozen yogurt versus 7 grams. 1.5 teaspoon versus 0. Again.
And anything that's made with cream or comes from an animal is
Right.
going to have some amount of saturated fat.
Right, as well as the cholesterol.
Yes, and cholesterol is animal fat.
Right,
And,
right.
you know, we were talking with Dr. Lileas about, you know, cholesterol and what it does to the body and that we make it. But I think it's really important that when you're ingesting this type of cholesterol into your body, you can't digest it effectively.
No, and it doesn't dissolve in the blood, so it's just there and it sticks
Yeah, it's like you can digest your own. You can't be digesting.
from the animal.
Yeah,
Yes.
that you're taking
Yes.
in as well. Bacon, eggs, and cheese biscuit. Oh my gosh.
I know.
It's like French fries.
French fries, 24 grams of fat or 5 teaspoons versus a whole wheat piece of toast, 2.5 grams.
So when you're grabbing that quick breakfast on the run, you don't want that.
No, and you're thinking, oh, I got a bagel, it's good, and maybe it's low-fat cheese, but that biscuit and, you know, the cheese probably is not low-fat alone, has, you know, it's 5
and
teaspoons of
biscuits are deceiving because
Yes.
biscuits and biscuit mixes, they're delicious.
Right.
But they have a lot of...
They have trans fat in them, they're saturated fat, you don't realize. Mm-hmm. You know, they may say cholesterol free, because it's not from the animal, the biscuit, but it has the trans fat in there.
You know, that's a great point, and now's a good time to talk about that. Don't be fooled when it says cholesterol free, or just because it says no trans fats.
Right.
But the whole series of bad is trans, saturated,
right.
cholesterol.
Cholesterol hydrogenated. So trans fat, that's an artificial fat that has been added into the food and by a chemical process where they convert it, and that's called hydrogenation, where they convert the liquid form into a solid. So, and they do that to extend shelf life, for texture, for taste. A lot of restaurants use those oils in their fryers because you can use them over and over again. So trans fat, again, is the more trans fat you eat, it's associated with increasing your risk for heart disease, higher your blood cholesterol. So that's found in baked goods, in pies, in pastries, cookies, frozen pizzas, Bisquick, for instance. And how you would see that, look for the label partially hydrogenated, because it can take a good vegetable oil and partially hydrogenate it, and then you have trans fat. So anytime the label says hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated, then trans fat has been added in.
And that's what you want to stay away from. I try to give people, I think visuals are great, because it's so difficult in our society to, you know, resist good tasting food. And we make bad food look so delicious.
Yes.
And we can make it taste really good.
Right.
But I think if you can get in the mindset of knowing and understanding what it's going to do to your body, that hopefully that will motivate you to think, you know what, do I really like it that much?
Right.
You know, and plus you can always find a better choice
alternative, absolutely.
that's just as good or better.
Yes.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I would show you the potato chips and the popcorn as well.
Now that's an air-popped popcorn.
Right. An air-popped, 1 cup, again.
That's not the movie popcorn with butter all over.
And the movie popcorn would be stacked up here.
Yes.
So versus a potato chip, just 1 ounce of chips is 11 grams of fat.
And 1 ounce is
1
like,
ounce,
oh God, I could eat
6
like
or 7 chips.
I haven't eaten potato chips in years, but when I did,
Yes.
I could eat like a medium bag myself.
Right. So you can just see the hidden fats there that, you know, you just don't realize in that small of a portion.
And I can tell you, there's something that I really, when you train your mind, there are certain foods you just don't miss. And honestly, cake and ice cream, I love it and hold
Right.
on. But really, if I really wanted to,
Right.
because there are times when I just don't eat it.
Right.
It's all in my
It's all
head.
in your head.
If I'm like,
Discipline,
okay, I'm
yes.
gonna have my cheat day, but it's like it's really not
Yeah.
all that great.
Right. And then bologna and turkey ham. Again, turkey ham, an ounce of turkey
Lean,
ham. And this
right?
is lean, correct. A half a teaspoon of fat versus an ounce of bologna, a teaspoon and a half.
And let's talk about when you go to the lunch meat counter now, because there was a time with the nitrates and so on, just no lunch meat.
Right.
Now there are some really great options out there. There are brands you can always ask the deli counter, what is your healthy? They have low sodium.
Right. They have lean,
Yes.
fat, yes, and they can direct you. Depending on what store you're at and which brand they're carrying.
Yep. And I try to tell people too, pick the higher quality. It's going to cost you a
Right.
little bit more,
Right.
but it's got so much more flavor and it's so much better for your health
Right.
that in the long run, it is going to save you so much money. And you
Right.
don't need as much because
No.
it's so flavorful.
Right. And then we have, lastly, our hummus and ranch dressing.
That's great for dipping our veggies.
And our hummus, you can see 2 tablespoons, only 2.5 grams of fat, or a half a teaspoon, versus a ranch dressing. Again, same serving size, 16 grams of fat, or 3.5 teaspoons.
It's
It is,
unbelievable.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you can go through 3.5 teaspoons real quick.
Yep. And ranch is one of the most popular. And I try to tell people with the salad dressing, if you're going to eat the creamy ones, definitely stick to the lights.
Right.
There's
Water 'em
nothing better
down.
than the olive oil.
Right.
Yes, my little secret is
Yep.
take a little bit of water, stir it around.
Yep, and you're good to go. But the
Yeah.
light and the olive oil are so much better, and they're so much healthier for you.
And I think and balsamic has become very popular now, but you even have to watch when you get a balsamic dressing and it's really
Thick and creamy. You have to watch, and you have to double check for that hydrogenation in there.
Absolutely. I have to show my favorite because this is if this doesn't have an influence on people, an average fast food sandwich, we won't mention any names, but this is like, let's say it starts with like a quarter. Anyway, it's a very famous burger. And I will say there are multiple burgers in the sandwich. And like I said, it's typical. But there are 3 full test tubes of saturated fat in this one, just one.
This is total fat.
That's one sandwich.
Right.
That is 33 grams of saturated fat
This is total fat.
in one sandwich.
Right.
And when I used to eat fast food, I could easily eat 2.
Right. And think like on a 2,000 calorie diet, roughly, about 60 grams of fat for the day is what you need on
Yeah, and I
average.
usually stay
Yeah.
around 50.
Right.
So this is just
And
awful.
yeah. And that's what the fat, this is what it looks like in your body. That's what it looks like. In
This white, solid-
sticking to
Yes.
the artery. Mhm.
And that's what clogs it and makes it so bad. We have to talk about sugar because it's such a part of the American diet. So tell me how sugar affects our heart health. Because you think about sugar and you think, oh, that's not clogging my arteries.
Right. Well, the excess because we do need sugar and we need the natural sugar coming from fruit, coming from milk and yogurt. But this right here is the excess refined white sugar that we've added into the food. And sugar, high sugar intake or high simple sugar is associated with elevating triglycerides. And in turn, with those elevated triglycerides, a lot of times you are increasing your risk for developing type 2 diabetes. So it's important that we're keeping this refined white sugar intake to a minimum.
Now, I'm going to show, but I'm going to tilt this so everybody can see because these are test tubes that are going to show us different amounts of sugar in various foods. I want them to see that on this particular test tube, it is a can of soda.
Correct.
And it is amazing to me that it is bigger than any test tube here. And what people don't understand is in regular pop, in regular soda, there are 10 3/4 teaspoons, which is almost 3 tablespoons of just pure sugar mixed in with a bunch of chemicals that will just really screw up your system royally.
Right. I always tell people, pour that amount of sugar out in front of you. Would you just sit and eat
Right,
that?
exactly.
Because I can't give up my pop, but I'm not going to eat all that sugar.
And touch on diet real quick, though. Diet, they're finding, too, the chemicals in diet are just as bad.
Just as bad, yes. You're not getting the sugar, but then you're getting the other stuff.
Exactly. Let's look at, here we have a cup of Lucky Charms or Fruit Loops. And I think this is a great visual because, and especially with your kids, start to read labels. Cheerios.
Cheerios are whole grain. There's no added sugar. And again, stay away from Honey Nut. Just get a regular Cheerios. And if you
Well, I think it's light. I think there's a little bit, but nothing, but it's a healthy choice.
Right, absolutely. And if you start them young, they'll acquire that taste. They won't know any difference.
Right, and watch those, anything like the Count Choculas
Yes.
and the, there again, just read the sugar label.
Anything with sugar, when we're reading sugar, 5 grams or higher than 5 grams is going to be added refined sugar. So you want to stay 5 or less.
This is a chocolate chip cookie, and there's 3 teaspoons of sugar in a chocolate chip
And
cookie.
that's 1 ounce. So it's very small.
It's a small.
It's not a big, large.
Yeah,
cookie.
that's right, a teeny cookie.
Right.
But you know what I try to tell people too? Learn, cook at home, then you can control
How much
the
is
ingredients. Because when I'm cooking at home, there are I always cut the amount of fat and the amount of sugar that goes into something.
Right.
And sometimes I'll replace it with the stevia, but you can make it so much better.
better.
Even honey, you're getting a little bit, still
Right,
a sugar,
sugar, yes.
but it's a little bit better and has some enzymes in it. A
Hershey
lovely
bar.
Hershey bar. Now, dark chocolate is great for heart health.
Correct.
And the more darker it is,
The
the
better.
more cocoa,
Right.
so the less of this. But this is a great example to show what's in an average, serving of milk chocolate. And this
Right.
isn't a whole lot.
No.
This is like 1.5 ounces,
Yeah.
not real big.
Not real big.
Okay. Over here we have half a cup of Jell-O. And Jell-O is so easy to get, sugar-free, and it tastes great.
Right.
There again, small serving. This is a brownie. There again, when you're making brownies at home, make them from scratch, double the cocoa, cut back on the sugar. Maybe add a little agave. Pancake syrup.
And that's 2 tablespoons.
And that is all refined and processed, unless you're get the 100% maple.
Right.
It is well worth it. Pay attention
Yes.
to your labels, and you're getting some natural enzymes and so on in your natural maple syrup. Oh, here we are, vanilla ice cream again. If you don't want to think about the fat, here you've got almost a whole tube of sugar in just a cup.
And yeah.
Not so good. Sad. A Pop-Tart. Oh, please, a Pop-Tart is like, I don't know where to begin on talking about a Pop-Tart.
Right.
It's just not, you want to eat fresh
Yes.
fruit, get a nice piece of whole grain toast,
Yes.
and put a little stevia or honey in a cup
And
of
you're good
tea.
to go.
There you go. There's your breakfast instead of the Pop-Tart. And lastly, we show a piece of apple pie, which is a small piece. And you got almost a whole
look
tube
at
of
the
sugar. Yep. So those are the things we want to try to cut back on. And there again, it's a lifestyle. The things we're talking about today, if you really love some of these things, eat them in moderation,
yes.
maybe 1 day a week. But don't make them the majority of your
choices.
And don't buy the stuff and keep it at
don't
home.
Keep it at home.
Keep the better stuff at home, and when you're on the run and you don't have, the time to necessarily, be so choosy.
Right.
That's when you can,
Right.
ease it up a bit.
Right.
Val, I can't thank you enough. You're
Thank
always
you.
such a great addition.
It's great to be
and
here.
tell the girls we said hi.
will.
Tell us about, we want to say hi to the girls real quick. Val has
4 girls.
beautiful daughters.
Gia, Sophia, Julia, and Natalia.
All right, tell them Aunt Mary sends her love.
Okay, I will.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Val. We've talked about the diet, and on the next show we'll talk a little bit more about exercise and heart health. But I dressed today purposely in my workout shoes and in attire that it's very easy to take a walk in, because when you think about heart health, remember, walking is the simplest and easiest way to move, and exercise really is important to heart health. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'm Mary Pipino, and thanks for watching Fit for You.